Welcome to the module where we talk about control. Control is a critical management function. Control is how we manage the execution of our plans. We've already looked at planning as a process. Control is how we make sure we stay on track with those plans and we reach the goals that we've set out. Any control system needs two things. It needs a goal, a target, and it needs something called a feedback loop. Feedback is the process where we gain information about what's happening. It can be from a lot of sources. Every one of us lives in a constant stream of feedback loops in our lives. We see things. The visual information that we see provides feedback that tells us what's going on. That's why we don't walk into walls and things like that. Businesses need the same kind of thing, although the feedback is not always visual. Here's a line of cars, and they all stay in the same lane. This is because they have visual feedback. Each of those drivers is able to see ahead of them whether they are getting too far to the left or too far to the right. And as they proceed, they make small corrections. If you begin to wander to one side, then you can simply turn the wheel and bring yourself back. That is a control loop. If you remember when you first learned to drive, it was probably fairly difficult to stay inside the lane and you struggled a bit. But after a little bit of experience, you became able to easily, without even really thinking about it, stay inside the lane because you get this visual feedback and you now have an effective control system. Your goal is to be between the two lines on the lane, and feedback loop allows you to stay there. Now, when you were a child, you probably played a number of games in which you were blindfolded. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in future modules. But you depended on other children, or you depended on sound, you depended on different things to provide feedback because you didn't have visual feedback. That makes the games more challenging and more fun. And in most cases, you needed two kinds of feedback. You needed a negative feedback and positive. Negative feedback is simply feedback that says you're doing something wrong, you're going in the wrong direction, you're moving away from your target, and you need to change direction and correct back to the original course. Positive feedback tells you you're doing it right, you're staying on track, you're heading towards your goal, just keep doing what you're doing. And those two flavors of feedback together allow very, very precise control for a game or for an organization's strategic plan. Now, plans provide the goals that are your target, and feedback gets you to them. If you remember when we laid out planning, we used the metaphor of the plan as a roadmap to a destination. So, staying with our car metaphor, control systems are things that keep you on the road, that tell you when you've made a wrong turn, negative feedback and you need to correct to get back on your track, or that tell you when you're on the right track and you're proceeding toward your destination, just keep doing what you're doing. Now, we're going to look at a lot of different control mechanisms, different things that you may or may not have realized were control systems. Budgets, for example, probably the single most common, most familiar form of financial control. You may have a personal budget in your life, or you may be responsible for a budget in an organization. Budgets tell us what we plan to spend on something. So in your personal budget, you may have a budget that says, I'm going to spend this much on food, and this much on gasoline, and this much on entertainment. And as you spend money and you begin to see the balance in your bank account dropping, and you see what you're spending it on, it tells you, I'm spending more than I expected on this, I need to reduce. I'm not spending enough on that, I can let that rise. Schedules are simply control mechanisms for timing, controlling the amount of time we spend on any given thing. A personnel review, where an employee is given a review on their performance, that's how we control their performance. We tell them when they're performing well, positive feedback, keep doing what you're doing, or when their performance is not meeting standards and it needs to be changed. Quality control systems are control mechanisms for manufacturing to make sure that we're producing exactly the right product. And a GPS system, a global positioning system, is one of the ways in which you might actually control your geographic travels across the landscape. Budgets help control the expenditure of resources, usually money. They tell you what you plan to spend, and you compare what you planned to what you did. That's feedback, and then you make adjustments. It's really the same process for every one of the tools I talked about. So one of the things that helps often young managers have to recognize, learn the ability to spot a control system, to understand when there's a standard and how they receive feedback that allows them to keep working toward that goal. So without control, you're not really managing anything. And the things that you call goals are really just dreams for the future. If you expect to reach those goals, you absolutely must have a control system. This is control. We're going to cover it in more detail in future units, but at the moment I would encourage you to read the chapter associated with this unit, to try and answer the questions associated with this unit, and if you have any questions at all about feedback and about control, if you're confused by any of this material, then absolutely look at this video as often as you need.